active and passive transport. The materials must cross membranes by either passive transport, which does not use energy, or active transport, which does use energy. Cell membrane functions. Formation of a cell membrane that could allow some materials to pass while restricting the movement of others is a major step in the evolution of the cells. Such membranes can regulate the contents of the spaces they enclose and thereby maintain homeostasis. And remember, we talked about homeostasis as being staying the same, keeping your body even. The cell membrane structure. The plasma membrane consists of a phospholipid bilayer with embedded proteins. And if you look here, you can see two layers of phospholipids, and the proteins are inside them, kind of like chocolate chips in a cookie. Some of the embedded proteins that span the entire membrane permit passage of substances across the membrane. They're called transport proteins, and you can see some of the proteins, such as the green ones, go full length of the layer, and others are just halfway. All biological membranes are selectively permeable or semi-permeable, and here you can see they let some things through. They let the ping pong ball and the marble and the BB go through, but the tennis ball and the basketball can't fit through the net. It's the same sort of idea. It will let some things through, but not everything. Diffusion. Some substances can pass into or out of the cell by diffusion. Diffusion is the way most substances move within the cell. The diffusion is the net movement of a substance from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Thus, a difference in concentration between two regions is required for diffusion to occur. A gradient is a change in something as you move from one location to another. So a concentration gradient is a change in the concentration of something from one place to another. There might be 30 grams per liter of a solute here, and down here only 10 grams per liter after you go another 5 meters. We picture each individual molecule as a blue dot. A constant concentration of molecules where there's no gradient would look like this, and it's just they're spread all over. With a concentration gradient, with a higher concentration of molecules on the left than on the right, would look like this, and you can see they're all bunched on the left and very few over on the right. So this lower picture is a concentration gradient. The top picture is no gradient. Okay, why does diffusion happen? Tiny particles, atoms, ions, and molecules that make up all matter are in constant motion, called thermal motion, and the warmer they are, the faster they move. The energy of those moving particles is called thermal energy. In liquids and gases, the overall movement of these particles is random and chaotic, each one moving in a different direction. The direction of motion of any one molecule can be changed by collision with another molecule or with the side of the container, but once in motion, the molecule will travel in a straight line until a collision occurs. The probability of a molecule moving in one direction is the same as the probability of it moving in the opposite direction. Now imagine that a crystal of dye is added to a beaker full of water and begins to dissolve. Each dissolved dye molecule moves around randomly. And if you think about if you pour a pack of Kool-Aid into a pitcher of water and don't stir it, just pour it in and watch what happens. Initially, more dye molecules are moving away from the crystal than toward it. However, the net movement will be away from the crystal. When the dye molecule becomes evenly distributed, their random thermal motion in all directions will be equal, so their net movement will stop. This is called dynamic equilibrium. And you can see the concentration gradient, and here's where there's no movement, or dynamic equilibrium. A concentration gradient has potential energy because it has the capacity to do work. If a substance has different concentrations on opposite sides of a membrane, its diffusion through the membrane could do work. It's like a dam that separates water at different elevations. The kinetic energy of water as it passes through a tunnel in the dam could work by spinning the water wheel or turbine, which is exactly what happens out at the Keystone Dam, where they make water. If you see the lakeside, the water level is The water's much higher than on the riverside. And the dam lets it through. It turns turbines and produces electricity. Substances are said to diffuse in the direction of their concentration gradient or down the gradient. They'll go from higher concentration to areas of lower. The diffusion of one substance is independent of the diffusion of all other substances. So here, if you see, you have two substances that start the blue starts on the left and the red starts on the right. In time, they'll all be mixed up because they don't work against each other. They'll just keep going. The rate of diffusion is affected by the size of the concentration gradient, the size of the particles, and the temperature. Higher temperature, things diffuse faster. If you put that Kool-Aid into boiling water, it's gonna get throughout the water faster than if you put it in cold. The higher gradient, the concentration gradient, diffuse faster, and smaller particles diffuse faster. The diffusion of solutes directly through the phospholipid bilayer of a cell membrane is called simple diffusion, and it's just going from one side to the other. The substances diffuse into or out of the cell down their concentration gradients. Since most cells use oxygen and produce carbon dioxide during respiration, oxygen is continually diffusing into the cell, and carbon dioxide is continually diffusing out of the cell. The diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane is also important in biology. It's given a special name. It's called osmosis. Since it's always true that the concentration of water in a solution decreases as the concentration of solute increases, water diffuses toward the side of the membrane with the higher solute concentration. Okay, that sounds a lot harder than it is. It's just going to go, water's going to go to where there's more stuff or a higher concentration. And if the membrane is impermeable to the solute, the osmosis will cause an increase in the volume of the solution with the lower water concentration and higher solute concentration. If you look, here's sugar solution, water less concentrated, there are more sugar molecules. The selectively permeable membrane dilutes sugar, and there's more water and less sugar. And it can go the opposite. The sugar will go across. So it goes across the membrane. The solution with the lower water concentration or the higher solute concentration is said to be hypertonic, and the other is hypotonic. Remember, hyper, more, hypo, less. Water diffuses from hypotonic to hypertonic solutions. Two solutions with equal solute concentrations and equal water concentration are said to be isotonic, and no osmosis occurs. Okay, substances that cannot diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer may diffuse through transport proteins. Remember, we showed the green picture in the green proteins that went all the way through? If they're available, this process is called facilitated diffusion. Substances that cross by facilitated diffusion include glucose, sodium, potassium, and chlorine. Each transport protein is effective for one specific substance. So the protein that will transport potassium won't transport sodium, and vice versa. Active transport occurs when a protein pumps a solute across a cell membrane from an area of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration using energy from the breakdown of ATP. Remember, active transport has to have energy. Passive transport did not. In endocytosis, the vesicle is formed by the plasma membrane. Endocytosis is used by cells to import water macromolecules or larger objects such as cell fragments or even whole cells. In exocytosis, the vesicle is formed by an organelle within the cell. Exocytosis is used by secretory cells to export large groups of molecules such as hormones and other processes. Endo, in, exo, out. And simple diffusion goes downhill, down the concentration gradient, requires no protein. Osmosis, downhill, the concentration gradient provides the energy, and there's no membrane protein required. Facilitated diffusion goes downhill, down the concentration gradient, but it has to have a transport protein. Active transport goes uphill against that using ATP for energy, and the protein pump, remember it has to have the proteins. Endocytosis and exocytosis go uphill using ATP, and they have no required protein. And the credits, along with the K-12 curriculum.